Hello and welcome to the Lean and Agile Show. I'm your host Shaheen, and I have a dear friend and great coach with me, Carlos Oliveira. I had the privilege to work with him and learn from him for the past many years, I might say, and I might not do the justice introducing Carlos. I use the coach title for Carlos, but he's much more than that. So Carlos, thank you for coming to the show.
Thanks, Shaheen. It's always a pleasure. Great to see you again and hear from you.
Welcome. So tell us, Carlos, who Carlos is.
Okay, what's the best way to describe Carlos? So I think, I think some of your audience might be familiar with, if you think about coaching and training and facilitation, to your point, perhaps I do more facilitation and training these days than pure coaching. But I really help organizations, solve challenges, test new ideas, get the best out of people in a workshop setting to really help them, achieve the outcomes that they're looking to achieve.
Right. And how did you get here to help these organizations solve these challenging settings?
Good question. Well, do you want the long answer or the short answer?
Up to you.
Yeah, hopefully we don't bore the audience too much along the way. But I've always really been into technology. I've always been into software development. Originally, programmer coming out of university. Had a software company. We developed enterprise learning management systems. So kind of got used to working with big companies in terms of implementing, complex software. Enjoyed doing that for many years. Started my agile journey that way in terms of kind of, banging your head against the wall, trying to figure out better ways of working. And then, team members were really excited about adopting agile practices. And then it was like, it really kind of blew my mind in terms of the impact that it had. It wasn't easy at first, obviously very disruptive, and then that's kind of when I realized that just through the way that you collaborate, the way that you work together, you can find some really magic opportunities to make things great happen. I've always really enjoyed working in product management, product like strategy, development. And while I spent about 10 years working on that enterprise software, at some point you start to realize like there must be more to this, like in terms of just, a new version or a new release. And that's when I kind of decided, okay, is there a way to help other people with this idea of, are we focused on the right thing? Because eventually you just kind of get used to, building and, releasing the software, and it's perhaps an incremental improvement. Maybe you made a mark, maybe you didn't. But this idea of really understanding, like, is this going to have an impact on, like, is the work that we're doing really going to truly impact the lives of others? And so that kind of started my, I guess, passion for things like lean startup and design thinking, where you really want to kind of test ideas and perhaps radically improve something in terms of innovation. And so that really started, I guess, my coaching journey in terms of helping teams and working with teams from that perspective. And eventually I was doing a lot of coaching for agile teams, for enterprise organizations, and then started doing more innovation coaching, and even for non-software teams. So just looking at, physical products and physical goods in the consumer goods industry. That was pretty exciting because it was it's still innovative, still technology based, but not necessarily software. And been doing more kind of independent consulting these days and helping organizations. Yeah. So that's my history.
Right. It's a pattern that I see in my guests, that they are becoming very successful. All of them started from a startup. Yourself mentioned that, and the other two guests that I had, Jason Little and Mike Burrows, both of them mentioned that they started their journey in a startup, and they learned the agile way of doing by as you mentioned, banging their heads against the wall and finding like better ways to do, right? And then when gone to the large organization or big corporations, they found out, oh, they are not doing it this way, right? So what's up with that? And you focus on the product, as I understood. So what made it interesting to you to focus on the product side?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I've always enjoyed an element of user experience and also design. So I think there is some aspect of that that I'm drawn to. Like I enjoy design, I enjoy user experience, UX. And perhaps that is why maybe I lean more towards the product in terms of trying to, build something that is a great solution or more appropriate for people to use and to get more value out of it. Also with the product, it kind of really connects well with the strategy of a business in terms of the value proposition. And so I think in my heart, I really enjoy like business strategy as well. And so those two things are somewhat connected. It's fascinating for me because I see a lot of teams and I see the impact that coaches can have on teams from a people perspective, which is amazing. And some coaches are phenomenal, like working directly with people when it comes to helping people along their improvement journey, along their careers, for example. And while I do enjoy that, my lens definitely is still on that strategy and that product for sure. Yeah.
And were you one of those developers that didn't need mock-ups because you were enjoying the design aspect a lot when you used to be a developer?
Yeah, for sure. I would spend a lot of time making sure that the pixels looked perfect and that they that it was pleasant to the eye. And I enjoyed that, but I also enjoyed the problem-solving nature of programming, developing. So,
were there any turning point for you that you move from a development perspective to more focus on the product side, or your starting your business was that turning point for you? Could you remember?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think as our business started to scale, there was just simply more demands on all our clients are asking for a roadmap. They have different opinions on what should come next, what they needed from their own business perspective. And I found that I did enjoy working with clients. Like I enjoyed working with stakeholders. I guess today you would consider maybe a product owner or product manager, and that role of working closely with stakeholders to co-create and build out that vision. And I enjoyed doing that work. And I guess perhaps my business partners also thought that I was a little bit more people-oriented than maybe some other developers. Right. And so I naturally kind of fit into that role, maybe.
Right. And these days you're working, I guess, across the organization from top to bottom, right? So tell us, when you engage with the organizations, which part would you start first? Which one is the most challenging one for you guys? And how do you come up with, get over those challenges?
Yeah, great question. It's interesting. I mean, so these days we do a lot of design thinking workshops, but we do it on many different challenges. So we do it on strategy, and in those instances, we definitely work a lot more closely with senior leaders and like the C-suite, for example. But we also do it on product design, right? So we might work with like a portfolio manager who are looking to test an idea in terms of some features that they want to build out, and so that might be more at a different level within the organization. Those would be the most so I would say those are the two most common challenges that we work on. But in either instance, we will apply similar kind of design thinking principles in terms of really kind of following a particular formula. We'll tailor it we'll adjust it for obviously the outcomes and the need of the business challenge. In terms of like when we're working at those different, like let's say with the different levels within the organization and what are, some of the challenges, what's interesting is, some common patterns that we find, if let's take the example of the product portfolio manager who maybe has a particular challenge and is looking at product design or is looking at a new way of developing a solution, for example. A lot of times what tends to happen is that there's so much uncertainty with the future that it's really foggy, right? So because there's so many different ways that you could apply the roadmap, let's say. And it's very easy to want to discover it all, right? To see the whole, let's say, end to end. And so I think bringing it back to help them say, okay, there is a lot of fog. And if you think about the experience is quite large, perhaps for a customer that's going through this journey. What I mean by customer, I mean like either the end user or the end customer that they're building for. And so sometimes it's just about identifying, where in that experience do you want to start? Right? And being okay with just starting somewhere in that experience. Perhaps maybe it's the most challenging, the most unknown, the most uncertain, for example, because the whole thing is uncertain, right?
Right.
And so just being comfortable with, okay, let's pick one area along this journey, for example, that we can kind of focus on and that we can improve meaningfully. And that usually is a challenge because I think it's human nature. We want to be able to see the whole road, right? Like look at the whole map, see the whole road before we dig into one area. And so, that takes a lot of trust in the process. That takes a lot of trust and to apply, prioritization and to apply focus. But they see the impact. They see the impact then when we do focus on a particular area and then we create a meaningful solution within that area, and they see that the end result and the end solution is much, much better than it would be if we had, let's say, just done like a broader, let's say, perspective on the challenge, but not as much meat on the bone in terms of the solution. Does that make sense?
Right. Yeah. So instead of you guys clearing out the fog for them, you're just standing there with them in the fog and finding out which part of the fog they are more comfortable to be standing in.
Yeah. And providing more clarity in, let's say.
Right. And one by one, clearing out the fog to
That's right. That's right. Yeah, because it doesn't have to be, one and done, right? Like this is the area that we're going to work on right now. We'll provide some clarity in this area. We'll provide something meaningful in this area that will really help, at least give us some insights on how to help your end customers. And then there's nothing saying that we can't focus on the next area later, right? I think, one of our partners had a good example. Like if you look at a lot of the shipping companies recently, like, DHL and Purolator and FedEx, for example, they've done a lot of work over the years to improve their process, right? But it's still not perfect, for example. Like there's still, they still struggle with making sure that people are home and when's the best time to deliver and, we missed you. And, how do we make sure that the person now, like there's still a lot of pain points along that journey. But if you look at some key areas, like for example, being fully transparent in terms of where your item is in the process and getting notifications, like some of that work they've done an amazing job in. So it's understanding that a lot of times we're dealing with like complexity that's quite large in its magnitude, and saying, okay, we don't have to fix everything all in one shot, and we don't have to fix it all overnight, and we don't even necessarily need visibility into everything with clarity. But where is an area that would be the most meaningful for your customers, that if you made an improvement in this area right now, it could really change their lives quite a bit. And so I think that's those are some of the common struggles that we run into. Yeah. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, for sure. And you mentioned about the design thinking process. Could you tell us more about what that is for our audience and how you engage, how you start with that? If they are new to design thinking, where to start from for learning that?
Yeah, great question. So design thinking has definitely been around for a long time. It's quite popularized by companies like IDEO and Stanford School of Business. Those are two great places to start as well. If you want to read more, they have a lot of free resources online. I think IDEO even has an online course that you can take. But the whole concept was to basically, are there steps that we can take to help create a meaningful solution for people that's human-centric, but it's also a collaborative approach to problem solving. And so they had kind of a recipe that they found to be quite successful. Right. So this idea of building empathy, so really truly trying to understand who your customer is, talking to them, listening, and then trying to define that, kind of like what I was talking about, trying to define what's that kind of really important moment or impactful problem that you could focus on that would really change their lives. And then doing some ideation around that. So, helping to perhaps visualize or brainstorm what are some potential solutions or some options, building something small in terms of a prototype or a right-sized prototype. I guess the right-sized portion is more of that lean mindset, but it's this idea of like, what's the smallest thing that we could do to then test out this solution of this idea, and then basically, move it into action, like actually put it in front of people, learn from them, see if we're on the right track, get their feedback. And so that's kind of like a codified, stepped process that's been around for a long time. It's great in the sense that it's simple enough. It doesn't necessarily mean you have to follow it linearly. It could be iterative. So, you could have this problem, perhaps ideate on it, and then realize, oh, actually, maybe this isn't necessarily the right problem. So you don't necessarily have to go through all 5 steps in sequential order. But it gives you kind of like a lightweight approach to problem solving.
Right. And would that the closest thing in Agile would be the potentially shippable product in that, right?
Yeah, I guess, it's a similar philosophy. I think in Agile, when you think about that potentially shippable increment of value, right, where it's like something that you want to show at the end, to know if you're on the right track. I think what's fascinating to me is that even the Scrum Guide defines potentially shippable increment as a learning objective, right? I even think it uses those words as a learning objective. And I think sometimes that gets lost, right? Like, hey, we're doing this to learn of whether or not we're on the right track, right? And so that's the same. So that would be the similar in design thinking. It's the whole prototype and test. So that's kind of the similar aspect to it. Yeah.
Right. It's fascinating how you would come to these different solutions coming from different communities, right? That they come up to address the same problem, I guess, right? Because it was coming from the design community, right? I guess the language was used, prototype and testing, right? Lots of focus on prototyping because I have been part of the design sprints, right? You focus on those mostly. But I guess Agile, since comes mostly from the development perspective, right? It's potentially shippable incremental value, right? And then like it's potentially shippable. It can be prototype, but then when you give it to the hands of the developers, like they want to make sure that it's shippable, something that the end user can use, right? And typically convincing them, hey, it could be potentially shippable. Let's make it a prototype, right? So that or mock some data, mock some API, so that we just can learn. it's a challenging task at hand.
Yeah, no, for sure. Yeah, I mean, like you're right. When we look at the different methods that the different communities have been successful at using, so whether it was design thinking, whether it was lean startup, which kind of brings the business element into it, or whether it was agile development, like all of them are empirical frameworks, right? Like they have these loops. Like even when you look at them, they're always illustrated in a bit of a loop.
Right.
And I think you're right. Like it's fascinating because, the loop is there to cut through that fog, right? To cut through that uncertainty. So, because if it was a simple problem, you wouldn't necessarily need the loop, right? It becomes, okay, well, it's just linear. I know the answer, it's a proven solution. We've done this before. And so but because these are complex problems, like software is complex, the design space or the problem space is complex, then these are the best ways of working. And I mean, we get it now because we've seen different methods and different frameworks come from different communities over decades. And they all have very similar principles and similar practices. I mean, every once in a while, you have a bit of a clash, right? Because it's like, oh, well, that sounds like it's design up front. And so we don't want to necessarily do design up front. We want to do it in the moment. And it's like, but really we're doing the same thing you're doing. We're just using a lighter prototype. Maybe it's a mock-up, or maybe it's like like a sketch on a page, for example, versus high quality code, right? But ultimately it's getting to the same learning objective. I think it is fascinating to see those and to be honest, I mean, these are like extremely capable people with a lot of knowledge and a lot of experience, whether it's a developer, a programmer, or a designer, for example. Like they have a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience. And so really it's just I think at its core, it's creating that environment to allow them to do their best work, right, together.
Right. So Carlos, I want to shift the conversation a little bit more about your learning capabilities, and to learn from you on how much you have learned and how much you have grown in the past, because you have been a developer, a successful one, a successful entrepreneur, build a great company, then become an agile coach, like through the experience. Now you are fully immersed in the design thinking, and I knew that you were fully immersed in lean startup, and you were apply those things not only theoretically but practically, and people asking for your services to come and apply those things, right? So if we think about like the journey that you had from development to agile to lean startup to design thinking, and all of them successful, tell us how much learning and how much effort does it take to for example, learn design thinking, get and I know outside of this development or outside of this professional board, you have your own hobbies that you learn those things, and you build on those. So tell us, what's the secret sauce of becoming a successful learner and be able to apply that like Carlos?
Yeah, that's a great question, Shaheen. I mean, I think what's kind of interesting and what's funny is, like you mentioned, I know you keep using the word successful, right? And I appreciate that, because it's like, oh, this is great. Like these guys think I'm really, super successful. And I think, some people love recognition, and I wouldn't say that I don't love recognition. Like it's nice to be recognized. These are either as a thought leader or somebody with experience or somebody who's been successful at business. I think it's always, at least from my perspective, I know, people have different values, different principles. So I do think it's nice to be recognized, but I know for a fact that it's also through a lot of really tough times and tough challenges and through failure. Like even our initial startup, like this idea of, okay, trying to build a successful software and then it's not working. And then you have to decide, okay, what do we do? Like we pivot. And then you almost pivot just because you need to make money, right? So it's like, okay, well, where's the money? Okay, this client needs this version and we have to customize it. We know we're going to have a lot of technical debt, then we're going to have to pay it off. And so those tough moments and those really challenging moments are there. And really, those are the ones where you learn the most for sure, right? Because then you start to realize, you're like, okay, why do we keep making the same mistake? Like, what could we do differently? Is it something I'm doing, for example? Is there something I need to improve or something I need to change? So I think as uncomfortable and as challenging those moments are, like really kind of embracing them and recognizing that it's part of the journey. And that's hard, right? Because nobody ever wants to fail or be unsuccessful, quote unquote. But I do think it's also kind of made me who I am today, for sure.
Right.
So I would say one is don't be afraid of I know this sounds like very cliche, right? Because this is the stuff that I talk about in my courses too, but like, don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid, like take a little bit of risk, right? And make sure you've got the support people behind you when you're taking that risk.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's probably people who are much stronger than you that can help you. I think about, for example, there's many times that I've taken a risk or I was about to take a risk and I wasn't sure and I had cold feet, and then you want to kind of back out, and then your wife is like, no, go do it. You'll be great at it. You've got lots of, so having that person who can support you and also be in your corner in terms of like championing the work that you're doing. So it doesn't necessarily have to be your wife. It could be your boss or somebody else, like whoever that support person is. I think is extremely important. And then the other thing I would say is, like, I know, again, like this sounds cheesy, but the whole aspect of like follow what you're passionate about. Like you mentioned, there's other things that I like and that I enjoy doing that I learn a lot about. And for me, it's because I'm really passionate about it. Like I really love it. And I think, I had this similar conversation this week. Like we do a lot of facilitation in our organization, a lot of facilitation. Like that is our core competency, is facilitation, because we run so many sprints and we run so many workshops. So in some ways you could say that our company is like an expert or a specialist, like specializes in facilitation, right? But really what I'm passionate about isn't necessarily facilitation. Like facilitation I love doing, and it's a byproduct of what we do. But what I'm really passionate about and what I love is innovation and product development, right? So, when you're picking, okay, where do I focus, right? And for me, where I learn the best is when I'm focusing on stuff that I'm really passionate about. Because that's where, you're going to be most likely to want to write that blog or to read that book or to review that article or follow that person. So that's kind of why, that's what I would, that's my advice, I guess, for what it's worth.
And it might take a while to come to your passion, right? You might just start from somewhere. I had one episode with Bob Galen about passion as well, that it's not easy to find your passion. So you need to be good at accepting failure. I'm not sure what the right words are, right? But experiment with the level of failure that you could accept, and then move forward if you cannot succeed in that, and move forward to the next one. And a support person is an amazing idea. I love that. I have the same support at home with my wife. Carlos, you mentioned about innovation. So let's talk about that a little bit. So how does that facilitation comes into innovation? Like you said, the facilitation is a byproduct of what you guys do, and the product is the product and innovation, right? So let's tell, first of all, what is innovation? What do you guys do when it comes to innovation?
Yeah, great question. I think it's interesting. I mean, there's maybe two ways to look at innovation. So one is like solving problems, and you can do it incrementally, right? So if you think about when we're developing software and we do have a new version and maybe we got some new features and they bring some new value. Or you can, most people think of, when they think about innovation, they think of like breakthrough innovation. So you've like fundamentally changed something and really improved it. So whether it's the business model, maybe there's a whole new way of doing things, so I guess those are the kind of like the two. So it could be like fundamental breakthrough, or really just improving the overall experience, let's say, by solving a particular problem. And what's interesting is, I think what I love about design thinking, what I love about sprints, is we do reserve some time for people to really think through the problem and make the time and space to explore lots of different options, lots of different solutions. I find that at work, we don't spend enough time doing that. You know what I mean? Like because there's that pressure, there's that timeline. We got to get the project out. We got to finish the sprint, for example. So we have some conversations about what the solution might look like, and then we just simply execute it, right? But I think, if you give people that time and space to really think differently and think about lots of different options, it's amazing what people come up with, especially if they start sketching it out or they visualize it, for example. And then you can do maybe a critique, for example, like spend the time to actually go through each one and talk about what's like what elements you like, what elements maybe. So just putting a focus a bit more on that can be quite powerful. And then it's amazing. Like, a lot of times I've gone into a sprint, and as a facilitator, obviously being neutral, being objective is extremely important, right? But you can't help, in the back of your mind, you're like, oh, I've got this good idea. Like, I know what could really help these people solve this problem, right? And so you continuously make sure that doesn't escape, obviously. And you go through the experience and you see what they come up with at the end, and every time I'm blown away. I'm always like absolutely amazed, right? Because I was like, I don't know how they're going to solve this problem. I don't even know what they're going to come up with. I've got my own ideas, but then when you see the different ideas that people have and what they rally around or what they want to kind of work on and stuff, it's amazing. So that for me is like that. So that's kind of where the innovation then comes about, right? Because it can be extremely surprising. Now, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work either, right? So that's just half of the battle, I guess, at that point. But then the process becomes, okay, let's prototype it, let's test it, let's see how people react to it. Do we improve it? Do we kill it? But it can really make a big difference. So that approach to collaboration can make a really big difference for sure.
Right, and that's where the secret sauce of facilitation comes in place, to hold yourself back, let them go through, right?
Exactly.
On facilitation, what are the good tips of people becoming good facilitators?
What are the good tips? Yeah, great question. So I recently had a client give me some feedback. They said what they appreciated of my style of facilitation was that I knew when to let the conversation keep going and when to stop it. And I think like the challenge with that feedback is that I couldn't necessarily tell you how to reproduce something like that, right?
True.
Because it's not necessarily a science, but and maybe it's a combination of art and science.
Right.
But I think, you're trying to get a level of that shared understanding, right, in the room. So you may not necessarily have alignment, but you want to at least have that shared understanding. And so, facilitation is tough. It's challenging because you're always tracking. So you're always kind of, somebody's got one thing that they want to throw in, somebody else throws in something else. And so you're trying to set up the rules of the game so that it's fair participation, and it's also providing a lot of clarity. I guess like the best tip is really pay attention. So listen, like truly listen. Also make sure that, you are kind of checking in with people to see how their level of understanding, their level of comprehension is for the given topic, whether or not this is important and it adds value to the overall outcome. And really helping them in terms of, okay, if this is not necessarily adding value, we should move on, right? And so I feel like it's a guide. You're serving as a guide to really help them problem solve. Yeah, so I don't know if that's helpful, but
for sure it's helpful. And what's next for Carlos? What was coming up next? What's your next big challenge, Carlos?
Yeah, great question. Like for us, we really enjoy running workshops with teams that are solving big challenges. We enjoy sharing anything we can with the community in terms of a lot of our meetups that we run or some of the training that we do. I think in terms of like, for us, a big goal for us is looking just at expanding in terms of some of the clients that we work with.
Right.
That's always kind of it's nice to be able to work on many different problems. You definitely start to see some similar patterns, like within companies across even different industries. We do kind of enjoy helping organization bring these skills inside of the company itself. Like I do firmly believe that, facilitation is one of the most important skills that organizations can have internally, right? Like within their own company. And so really just getting as many people kind of up to speed on how to do this within their own organization is kind of the next big challenge for us.
And you mentioned the patterns that you see in different organizations. The patterns are kind of similar. Have you thought about sharing those patterns in any way or form, like maybe on a blog post or on a book or on something more visual?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, in some instances, we've actually been helping companies recently with that exact process because how they define a problem or how they explore that problem or how they design for that problem. Now we've seen kind of like the patterns that have been working really well in many different organizations. And so kind of putting it together and helping them leverage that. I don't know if maybe in the future that will become a book or if it'll be, it could be a blog post for sure. I think it's taking the time to definitely share that material in a way that's easy for people to understand would be great for sure. Thanks for the idea, Shaheen.
Yeah, no problem. So a book coming up based on patterns.
That's right. That's right.
Okay, Carlos, we are getting almost to the end of the podcast. Is there anything else that we wanted to talk about that I didn't bring up and you want to add?
No, no, I appreciate that you invited me onto your show. I know, I've always admired the work that you do in the community in terms of like moving our thinking and our practices like forward into organizations. And I've actually enjoyed the workshops that you and I have done in the past too, right? What was the problem solving leadership? That was a great one. I think that was actually recommended by Jason Little, wasn't it? I can't remember who recommended that one to us, but
it was recommended to me by Sean Button.
Oh, Sean Button. Yeah. I think for me it was Jason, but I think these things are really helpful. So I just wanted to thank you for doing that. And being able to share with the community and get everybody kind of moving to just make organizations better to work at, right? So
right. Yeah.
I think that's
the
really helpful.
Ultimate goal, I guess, for every one of us, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. So thank you for that.
No problem. Is there any way for our audience to be able to contact you, maybe through your LinkedIn, email, whatever you prefer to share? We put it on the podcast note.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, they can definitely reach out to me at adaptivex.ca, or reach out to me through LinkedIn. Happy to connect with folks. And you can always visit our website at www.adaptivex.ca.
Awesome. Thank you very much, Carlos, for being on the show.
Thanks, Shaheen. Yeah, my pleasure.